It happened 3 days after my son won the lottery. Not 3 weeks, not months later, 3 days. That's when he told me to leave. I still remember the sound of his voice, flat, distant. "Mum, this just isn't working anymore." He handed me an envelope, $10,000. Cash, the same hands I once held through scraped knees and night terrors, now giving me cash to go away. I didn't cry. Not then. I stood on the porch of the house I had helped him buy, the house I had helped raise his daughter in, and I watched through the window as they popped champagne, my son, his wife, their friends, celebrating their new beginning. Without me, and maybe that's what hurt more than the money. It was the suddenness, the cruelty disguised as moving on. You see, I wasn't just living with them out of need. I had moved in to help. 15 years of cooking, cleaning, babysitting through flu seasons, tantrums, and lost backpacks. I was the one who stayed when their world was spinning. I was the quiet net under their lives, but when fortune came knocking, I became a burden. All my years of love, traded for an envelope. All those birthdays, bedtime stories, the carved wooden bird I made for my son when he was 10, discarded like clutter from a life they outgrew. They thought I had nothing, but they didn't know what I had kept. Or what I had quietly prepared just in case, and they certainly didn't expect the one heart in that house who would see me. Still. Because this story isn't just about money, it's about memory, about love, about the moment a woman realises she was never really invisible, just underestimated, and when I tell you what happened next, you'll understand why some things are more valuable than $17 million. Before the money, before the sudden silence, they used to call me their angel in the house. Every weekday morning, I'd wake before everyone else. Warm cinnamon toast for Ellie, their daughter. A pressed shirt for James, my son. Coffee for his wife, Rachel, always with oat milk and just a pinch of cinnamon. They didn't ask me to move in. I volunteered. When Ellie was born, they were both working overtime, James in tech, Rachel finishing her clinical hours as a therapist. "I don't want her raised by strangers," James had said, his voice cracking when I offered to stay a while. That while became 15 years. I gave them everything I had, my time, my knees, my good years. They let me turn the garage into a small room bare, but mine. I never asked for anything, not rent, not thanks, just to be needed. There were good days, afternoons with Ellie in the garden, game nights when Rachel would laugh till she cried, and every Friday I left a little paper bird on the kitchen counter. Just something I'd started doing, folded from a grocery list, a magazine page, even napkins. Ellie loved them, called them Grandma's Friday birds. Once I carved one from wood, a little thing, maybe 3 inches tall, painted it with leftover acrylics. James said he'd keep it forever. I believed him. Looking back, I don't think I noticed when things began to change. Rachel became busier, more guarded. She started leaving sticky notes instead of saying things out loud. One morning, I found a daycare flyer tucked into Ellie's backpack. Another time, James whispered something to Rachel while I was washing dishes, and when I turned, they both looked away. Still, I ignored it, because that's what we do, isn't it? We hope, we endure, we tell ourselves it's just a season. But deep down, I think I knew. I just didn't want to name it yet, because once you name the distance, you can't pretend it isn't there. It started small, like most endings do. Rachel had always been a bit particular, but in the early years, she'd smile when I smoothed Ellie's hair, or thanked me when I kept dinner warm late into the night. There was kindness in her once. I remember it. But over time, something in her shifted. One Sunday afternoon, I was helping Ellie with a puzzle. Rachel walked past and paused. then said, "Ellie, remember what we talked about? Let's give Grandma a little space." I smiled and waved it off, but it stung, because Ellie hadn't said a word. She was just laughing. Then came the little changes. The grocery list on the fridge, which I had always added to, now had a bold line drawn across the bottom with a note, "Please don't add anything without asking." The recipe cards I had taped near the stove, Rachel quietly took them down. One afternoon, she was folding laundry and I offered to help. She hesitated, then handed me only the towels. That was the first time I felt it, the sorting, the shrinking of my space. I started to feel managed, handled, as though I were a guest overstaying my welcome. At dinner one evening, Ellie told a story about how I taught her to thread a needle. Rachel interrupted gently. "Sweetie, let's talk about school instead." I laughed to fill the awkward air, but James looked down. That silence told me more than words. Then came the whispers, at night, behind their bedroom door. I never meant to eavesdrop, but the walls were thin. Words like boundaries, retirement home, financial independence. My hands would tremble doing dishes, pretending I hadn't heard. I tried asking James if something was wrong once. He hugged me, said, "Of course not, Mum. We love having you here." But love doesn't hide in hallways. Love doesn't erase you from family photos. One afternoon, I found a new frame on the mantel. It was a beautiful black and white print of the three of them, Rachel, James, and Ellie at the lake. The wooden bird I'd carved was gone, replaced by a scented candle labelled "Fresh Start." It was a Tuesday when James called from the driveway, his voice urgent, boyish, almost breathless. "Mom, you won't believe it, we won." At first, I thought he meant a contest, maybe another raffle at work, or a small local prize, but when I stepped outside, he was holding the lottery ticket, both hands trembling. 17 million, he whispered, eyes wide. "Can you believe it?" Rachel came running down the steps, barefoot, screaming, waving her phone in the air with the news pulled up. I laughed. Actually laughed, because for a brief moment I thought this would change everything. For the better. We opened champagne that night. Well, they did. I had tea in the kitchen and made a tray of garlic bread because Rachel forgot to set out food. Ellie danced through the living room, twirling with the confetti her dad had made from paper towels. I watched her and felt this deep, fluttering hope. Maybe, just maybe, the joy would bring us back together. But then came the conversation I wasn't meant to hear. Rachel and James, 2 rooms away, voices low, but not low enough. "She can't stay here forever, James." "I know, but we haven't even talked about it." "Well, now's the time." My heart knocked inside my ribs like a fist on a locked door. I sat on the edge of my bed, hands in my lap, and listened as my name became a problem to solve. Later that night, Rachel stood at my doorway. She didn't knock. "Just so you know," she said softly, "we're looking at some long-term solutions for everyone's well-being." I nodded. I couldn't speak, but inside, something in me began to retreat, the way trees pull in their sap before winter. The next morning, the energy in the house was different, lighter, like I had already left. No one asked if I wanted breakfast. Rachel didn't look up from her laptop. James smiled, but it was the kind of smile you give a stranger in a waiting room. That afternoon, I walked past the mantel again. The candle labelled "Fresh Start" was gone. In its place, a framed screenshot of their lottery confirmation. I never told James about the scratch-off tickets. It was just something I did when I stopped buying magazines. Every Thursday, I'd walk to the corner store with change from couponing. $1 or $2, no more. Just enough to remind myself that luck could still find me, even if I wasn't invited to the table anymore. It started after Ellie went to kindergarten full-time. The house got quieter, the to-do list shorter, and Rachel's tone sharper. I needed a small rebellion, something that was just mine. The clerk, Manny, knew me by name. He'd always grin and say, "Come on, Grandma Nora, today might be your day." I never believed it, but I liked hearing him say it. Then, one Thursday, it happened. 3 identical diamonds, $3 million. I didn't scream, I didn't dance, I just stared. Manny looked at me and froze. He said something like, "Nora, you okay?" But my ears were ringing. I told him I needed a moment, walked out and sat on the bench outside the pharmacy. Felt the wind against my face, closed my eyes. I was 68, sitting on a splintered bench with a purse full of tissues and peppermint candies, and suddenly I was a millionaire. That night, I didn't say a word. They were talking about kitchen remodels and first-class tickets. James showed me new shoes he bought online. Rachel was calling it a new chapter, and I just smiled, because while they were spending their future, they had no idea I had my own. The ticket sat folded inside a Christmas card from Ellie, one she made when she was 6. "Grandma, you are the warmest person I know." I tucked it deep in my pillowcase, didn't tell a soul, because for the first time in years, I had something that was mine, and it was beautiful. It was nearly 8:30 when the phone rang. I was folding Ellie's pyjamas, even though no one asked me to anymore. James and Rachel had gone out to celebrate again. The sound of laughter had become distant in this house, like a party I was no longer invited to. I picked up the phone without checking the number. "Hello? Nora? Oh my goodness, it's really you." I froze. It had been more than 20 years. "Linda," I whispered. "Linda Bowers. We used to work together at the library downtown before I gave it up to raise James. She was younger than me by a few years, but she always called me her big sister in spirit. We used to share lunches in the back room, trade mystery novels, and laugh about ridiculous patron questions. She told me she found my number through the old alumni board. She'd been trying for weeks. "I just had this pull to find you," she said. "I don't know why. I just missed you." And just like that, something cracked open. I told her about Ellie, about James. I didn't say much about Rachel, but Linda, being Linda, filled in the blanks. "That tone in your voice," she said. "I know that sound." "You don't feel seen anymore." I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. "Not yet." Then she asked the question no one else had. "What do you want, Nora? Not what do you need, not how can I help, but what do you want?" I sat there for a long time and finally said, "I don't know." "Well," she said gently, "how about starting with breakfast? With me, this Sunday, my treat. You pick the spot." I almost said no, but instead I heard myself say, "I'd love that." Linda laughed. "You always did order pancakes for dinner." And I smiled for real this time, because in that small invitation, someone remembered me, not as a grandmother, not as a burden, just Nora. Sunday came with soft grey clouds and the scent of early fall, just cool enough for a sweater, just quiet enough to notice things again. I wore the old teal cardigan Ellie once spilled apple juice on. I never got the stain out, but I always liked that it was hers. Linda picked me up in her little red Prius, still covered the back seat with a crochet blanket, still hummed along with the radio like nothing had changed. We went to a diner near the lake, the kind with cracked leather booths and thick ceramic mugs, the kind that remembered people like us. Linda ordered pancakes. I did too. Halfway through, she reached across the table and said, "You know, Nora, you used to talk about writing." I blinked. "Writing? You always said you wanted to write a little book. Stories from the library, the people you met." I laughed softly. "I forgot I ever said that." "You didn't forget," she said gently. "You just got busy loving everybody else." Something inside me quieted, not silenced, just stilled. We sat in that booth for almost 2 hours, talked about nothing and everything, her sister's hip surgery, my favourite tomato soup recipe, how we both still rewatch Murder, she wrote, and then came a sentence I didn't expect. You know, Linda said, I never had kids, but when I picture family, I always think of you. I looked down at my plate. The syrup had pooled into the shape of a heart. Ridiculous but true. That night, when I got home, the house was silent again. But I didn't feel empty. I pulled the drawer open, the one beneath the mantel, took out Ellie's card, took out the library badge, and added a third thing, the paper napkin Linda had scribbled on, just one line. Start the book, Nora. I'll be your first reader. I placed it next to the others like it belonged, because maybe, finally, I was beginning to belong again, to myself. I woke up Monday to the sound of cupboard doors slamming. James was in the kitchen, pacing. He was dressed, but not for work, jeans and an old sweatshirt. His hair looked like he'd slept on the couch. Rachel wasn't around. Is everything all right? I asked, keeping my voice low. He didn't answer at first, just opened the pantry, then closed it again like he'd lost something. Finally, he said, We're thinking of selling the house. The words fell like cold water. Selling? I repeated. Where would you go? Rachel's been offered a position in Seattle, he said, eyes still scanning the fridge now. It's more flexibility for her, better schools for Ellie, a fresh start. I waited. No mention of where I would fit into this fresh start. James, I said carefully, you know my doctors are here. And my treatment. He cut in too quickly. We're not making decisions yet, just exploring options. But I'd known my son long enough to hear the truth between the lines. He wasn't exploring. He was preparing. And Rachel, she wasn't even trying to pretend anymore. She came home late that night, walked straight past me like I was furniture. Ellie waved from the doorway, but even she looked unsure now, like a child told not to say too much. I sat in my little garage room for a long time after that, held the drawer open, fingers grazing the edge of the napkin Linda had given me. What would I take if they sold this house tomorrow? A cardigan, a drawer of memories, and a winning ticket no one knew about. I thought about telling James. I thought about offering help, helping them keep the house, or buy a new one closer to Rachel's clinic. But something inside me stopped, not out of spite, out of clarity, because I'd finally started to remember what it felt like to want something for myself. Rachel caught me on the back porch. It was early evening sky, turning that strange orange blue, the kind of light that makes everything look sharper than it should. She didn't sit, just stood behind me, arms crossed. We'll help you find a place, she said flatly. No greeting, no lead-in, just that. A place? I asked, even though I already knew. A studio, maybe, or an assisted unit. James is looking into it. She paused. There's one not far from here. It has decent reviews. She pulled her phone from her coat and tapped the screen. A photo popped up. A beige-walled room with one window and a plastic chair. I didn't look. Instead, I said softly, And the hospital? The oncologist? You expect me to start over? Rachel shifted her weight. They'll have options in Seattle too. You're still early in the cycle. I finally turned to her. There's no we in this, is there? She blinked, didn't answer. So I asked what I should have asked months ago. Do you want me gone? Rachel. A pause. Then she said it. Quiet. Honest. I need my home back. My fingers curled slightly around the armrest. She continued, voice tight. I didn't grow up with a mother, Nora. Not really. I was raised by my father's second wife. And it was always like I was borrowing space. In my own home. Now her eyes flicked up. I don't want Ellie to feel that. I want her to know who sets the rules, who leads. And just like that, I saw her, not just as my daughter-in-law, but as a woman trying to build something of her own, even if it meant tearing me out of it. I said nothing. Because what could I say? She didn't scream, she didn't slam doors, she just made space for herself, by erasing mine. After she went back inside, I stayed on that porch until the light faded, and for the first time, I let myself consider it. What it would mean to leave. What it would feel like to disappear without explaining the truth, or the ticket hidden behind my bookshelf. I packed a single suitcase the next morning, not because I'd made peace with leaving, but because I wanted to know how it would feel. James didn't say a word as I folded the cardigan Ellie loved, or slid my small wooden jewellery box into the corner of the bag. He stood in the doorway, arms crossed, like a stranger waiting for a train to leave. "I'll come by this weekend to help you move the rest," he muttered. The rest. Like I was furniture. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Ellie came in a little later with a folded drawing. It was us stick figures, holding hands. One big, one small, a heart above. "I made this for your new house, Grandma," she whispered. I wanted to crumble right there. Instead, I smiled, and I'll put it right by my bed. She hugged me, her small arms fierce around my waist, and then Rachel stepped in. Tidy, neutral, civil. "There's a car waiting. I scheduled the appointment for 2 p.m. They'll show you the unit." I looked at her, really looked, not angry, not even hurt, just aware. "Thank you," I said. She blinked, slightly thrown, but didn't reply. I picked up my bag. The house felt unfamiliar now. Every photo on the wall seemed to belong to someone else. At the door, James finally spoke. "Mum," he said, "it's not forever." I paused. Then, very gently, "It never was, sweetheart." And I walked out. The place they found for me wasn't awful, but it wasn't home. A beige-walled studio with a low twin bed, one dresser, and a bathroom that echoed when you spoke. There were no windows, just a narrow pane of frosted glass near the ceiling that let in a slice of morning light like a reluctant apology. I stood in the doorway for a long time before stepping in. The air smelled like bleach and lavender, but neither could cover the scent of absence. The nurse gave me a tour, told me about meal hours, emergency buttons, and shared laundry. I nodded, smiled, tried to be grateful. But inside, something tightened. There was a bulletin board on the wall with fake flowers pinned to it. Plastic, dusted, faded. Below it, a small table. I placed Ellie's torn drawing there, taped carefully together at the back, its crease now a quiet scar. I made tea with the little kettle they gave me, stared at the walls, waited for a call that didn't come. Days passed slowly. Rachel didn't visit. James sent a grocery card once with a sticky note. "Hope you're settling in. Settling in." Like moss on a stone. I asked the nurse if I could take a walk. She said, of course, as long as I signed the log sheet. So I walked, each morning, just a few blocks. Down to the corner store. Manny was still there. Same apron, same hopeful grin. "Nora!" he beamed. "You disappeared on us." I smiled. Life got noisy. I bought a tea and one ticket. Not to win, just to remember. He handed it to me gently. Still got that lucky touch. I didn't answer. Back in my room, I tucked the ticket beside the old one in the envelope. Still unopened, still mine. But something was shifting. I wasn't sure yet if it was grief or resolve. It was Rachel's voice on the phone, not James's. "Hi, Nora," she said, clipped. "James is driving. I wanted to talk first." I leaned back against the wall, clutching the warm mug in my hand. Steam rose, gentle, like something trying to disappear. "I just wanted to say," she continued, "I hope you understand this wasn't personal." I didn't answer. "I know it probably felt cold," she added, But we've been juggling so much. Ellie has school evaluations, James is swamped at work, and She paused. I'm trying really hard to create some normalcy for our family. Our family. That phrase landed like a stone in my chest. Still, I said nothing. Rachel exhaled, then her tone shifted just enough to hear the crack. I never had a real mother growing up. I was raised by my father's second wife, and she didn't want me there. My eyes closed slowly. Rachel's voice softened, the edge gone now. I always promised myself when I had my own home, my own daughter, I'd never let someone else set the rules under my roof. And just like that, the motive unfolded. Not malice, not cruelty, control, because she'd never had any. I didn't mean to hurt you, she said, but I needed my space to be mine. That word again mine. I finally spoke. I understand, Rachel. I truly do. And I did. More than she knew. She hesitated. James doesn't agree with how it happened. He's struggling with it. That startled me. Struggling? He didn't want to call you. He said he still feels like he betrayed you. My heart thumped. James hadn't said any of this, not to my face. I thought he wanted this, I said. He didn't, Rachel whispered, but he didn't stop it either. And that was the truth, wrapped in silence. Rachel continued, quieter now. I just needed to explain. I didn't want it to all fall on him. Then a soft chime in the background, her phone's calendar alert. I have to go. We'll talk more when we come by. The line went dead. And I sat there, staring at the cup in my hand, steam gone, tea cold, but my clarity had just begun to rise. They came late that Sunday. Rachel stood behind James, arms crossed but polite. James held a grocery bag, like it could soften what had hardened between us. But Ellie ran straight in. "Grandma!" she shouted, her backpack bouncing behind her. I bent down just in time to catch her, her arms locked around my neck. Rachel cleared her throat. "Ellie, don't be too loud, okay?" Ellie looked up at me. "Did you put up my drawing?" I smiled and pointed. "Right there, by the table lamp." She grinned. "Good." James stayed near the door. He looked around the room as if it was smaller than he'd imagined. Then his eyes landed on the drawing. He said nothing, but he stared at it longer than he needed to. Rachel busied herself setting down the grocery bag, a careful arrangement of low-sodium soups, bananas, and instant oatmeal. "This should get you through the week," she said flatly. "Thank you," I replied. Ellie tugged at my sleeve. "Can I leave something here?" "Of course." She rummaged through her backpack and pulled out a tiny object wrapped in tissue. When she unwrapped it, my breath caught. It was a wooden tulip, painted green and lavender, my favourite colours, slightly chipped on one petal. "I made it at school," she said proudly. "For you." I blinked quickly. "It's beautiful." She set it gently beside the drawing. James cleared his throat. "We won't stay long, just wanted to check in." Rachel nodded without looking at me. Then Ellie turned, looking serious. "Mommy says you're sick, but you don't look sick." I smiled. "That's kind of you to say." "I told Mommy she should let you come to my recital," Ellie added. Rachel's jaw stiffened. James looked down. "Well," I said softly, "we'll see." Ellie leaned in and whispered, "I already saved you a seat." And in that moment, with the chipped tulip and the folded drawing sitting side by side on my table, I remembered something I'd nearly forgotten. I still mattered to someone. That night, I couldn't sleep. The room felt too still, like the quiet had weight to it. I stared at the chipped wooden tulip on the table, its shadow stretching across the grain like a question I hadn't answered yet. Beside it sat the envelope, still unopened, still humming with possibility. I reached for it slowly, as if touching it too quickly might wake up something in me I wasn't ready for. The paper felt soft, worn, like old bed sheets that remembered too much. I turned it over. The seal was still intact. I'd kept it that way for months. For what? Fear? Hope? Pride? I took a breath and opened it. Inside was the winning ticket, still neatly tucked inside the store receipt from Manny's corner shop. The numbers were there, 7 of them. All correct. The date was from the week James and Rachel had moved me into the care home. A bitter laugh escaped before I could catch it. I'd had millions in my purse, and they were too busy unloading my suitcase into a room with no windows. I set the ticket on the table. It looked so small, like it shouldn't be able to shift a whole world. But it could, and maybe it would. I picked up a pen and paper. Not for a will, but a list of people. People who'd smiled at me when I came to their counter. The neighbour who shoveled my walkway that one winter. The girl at the clinic who always tucked an extra cookie in my lunch bag. Names I hadn't said out loud in years, but who'd once made me feel seen. And at the top of that list, I wrote Ellie. Then I did something I hadn't done in months. I opened my closet, took out my old cardigan, the grey one with frayed cuffs Ellie used to tug when she was little, and I folded it carefully, placed it in a bag right beside the envelope, because something had shifted, and tomorrow I would too. Manny's shop hadn't changed. Same flickering, open sign. Same stack of sunflower seed packets near the register. But when I walked in, he looked up like he'd seen a ghost. Nora, he blinked. You okay? I smiled. Better than I've been in a long time. I handed him the envelope. He opened it, then froze. Is this? It is. He stared at me, then back at the ticket. Nora, this changes everything. I nodded. That's the idea. He laughed nervously. You gonna tell James? I might, I said. But not first. He shook his head in disbelief. Let me know if you need help. With anything. I thanked him, stepped outside, and for the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible on the sidewalk. The sun was soft on my face. Cars passed, a child's bike clattered near the corner. I was part of it all again, not background. That afternoon, I called James. Hey, I said simply. He sounded surprised. Mum, can you stop by? Just you. A pause. Yeah, of course. When he arrived, he looked like he hadn't slept well. I opened the door before he knocked. He held a bag of oranges. I didn't comment on it. We sat at the table. The drawing and tulip were still there. James noticed. He looked up at me. You seem different. I feel different, I said. How are you? He hesitated. I'm not proud of myself. Silence stretched between us. Then he said something that didn't match the script Rachel had written. I tried to stop it. The move, the way it happened. I turned to him. Then, why didn't you? His voice caught. I was afraid of the fights, of upsetting Ellie, of being stuck between you and Rachel. And there it was. He hadn't chosen her over me. He'd chosen ease over conflict, and that hurt in a different way. James looked at the table. You put the tulip next to the drawing. I nodded. He smiled, faintly. She talks about you every day, you know. I looked at him gently. She's the reason I stayed quiet. Until now. He shifted, uncomfortable. Then he asked, Mum, are you okay for money? I met his eyes. I will be. Very soon. He blinked. What do you mean? I didn't answer. Instead, I reached down and handed him a folded piece of paper. He opened it, but it wasn't a check, just a list of names. He read a few, puzzled. Who are these people? People who remembered me, I said, even when you forgot. The phone rang just after sunset. I was making tea, standing by the window, steam curled up from the kettle like a soft exhale. The light outside was golden. A quiet hour. The caller ID said, Rachel. I didn't move, didn't reach for it. I let it ring. Then the voicemail icon blinked. I waited a few minutes before pressing play. Her voice came through, tight and composed. "Hi, Nora. I just wanted to check in. James said he saw you." A pause. "I hope you're feeling okay. Ellie's been talking about you a lot." Another pause. "We were thinking maybe you could come for dinner next week, if you're feeling up to it." That part was new. No conditions, no clipped tone, just a hesitant invitation. I sat down at the table, still holding the warm mug. Rachel's voice continued. "I know things weren't handled perfectly. I've been under a lot of pressure, and I guess I didn't see how it affected everyone." There it was. Not quite an apology, but not pure control either. A space in between. A breath. The voicemail ended with, "Just let us know. Ellie misses you." I didn't call back, not right away. Instead, I stared at the list on my table. Names written in my neat handwriting, some underlined, some with question marks. People who'd loved without expecting returns. I added one more line, Rachel, pending, because even if she hadn't earned her way back, she had, at last, knocked, however, softly, and I wasn't the one standing outside anymore. The lawyer's office smelled like pine wood and dust. Old books lined the shelves. Sunlight spilled in through the blinds, slicing the room into warm bars of light. I sat in the leather chair across from Mr. Elkins. He looked at me the way people do when they're waiting for the real reason you came. I placed the envelope and the list on his desk. Then I said, "I want to make changes to my will." He raised an eyebrow. "All right. Additions or removals?" "Both," I said, "but mostly reordering." I unfolded the list slowly. Some names had tiny notes beside them. Lent me her coat, always smiled at church, brought soup when Ellie was sick. Mr. Elkins scanned the page. "These folks, they family." I shook my head. "They're the ones who stayed when family left." He nodded slowly. "You're sure about this?" I smiled, steady. "I've never been more sure." He pulled out a yellow legal pad. "I'll need percentages, assets, specific bequests." I leaned forward. "The house goes to Ellie, no conditions." His pen froze. "Not to your son or his wife?" "No," I said simply, "but they're not cut out completely." I paused. "They'll receive what they need, but not more." Mr. Elkins adjusted his glasses. "That's unorthodox." "So is being left in the rain by your only child." He gave me a look. Not pity, respect. "What about charitable donations?" I tapped the list. "There's a librarian on there, a bus driver, a retired nurse. I'd like to set up small monthly stipends for each. Quietly, anonymously." He smiled for the first time. "I can do that." I leaned back as he began writing. His pen scratched softly against the paper. Outside, someone passed by, whistling. A dog barked in the distance. Life kept moving. But I wasn't floating in it anymore. I was rooted. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop trying to prove your worth and start preserving your dignity. The next morning, I walked Ellie to school. Rachel had texted a quick, "Thank you for helping," but didn't say more. James stayed quiet, his eyes heavy, but no longer defensive. We passed the bakery, the same one I used to take James to when he was her age. Ellie's little hand in mine was warm, soft, trusting. She skipped once, then looked up. "Grandma," she said, "how come you always know how to make people feel better?" I smiled. "You think I do?" She nodded fiercely. "Even when Mommy's mad, you just hug her anyway. Even when Daddy forgets stuff, you still remember what he likes. You make it better, even when it's hard." I paused on the sidewalk. A breeze rustled the leaves, and for a moment, it was like the world stopped to listen. Then Ellie said, "Mum said, love means not keeping score." But I think it also means remembering what matters. I blinked. My own words spoken years ago to a crying James echoed back at me, through the voice of a child who'd simply been watching. Not forgotten, not erased, remembered. We kept walking. At the crosswalk, she squeezed my hand. "Are you okay, Grandma?" I knelt beside her. "I am now." She smiled and reached into her backpack. "Look, I drew this for you." She handed me a folded piece of paper. A stick-figure woman with grey hair stood between two smaller figures. All were smiling under a big yellow sun. At the top, she'd written, "My grandma is my sunshine." It was Friday afternoon. Ellie's school had invited parents and grandparents for Sunshine Circle, a little event where kids shared drawings and sang a short song. I sat in the back row, quiet, clutching the folded drawing she'd given me the day before. The teacher introduced each child. When it was Ellie's turn, she walked to the front and held up her picture for everyone to see. "My grandma is my sunshine," she said with a proud grin. I felt a tear slide down my cheek. And then I saw Rachel, standing at the back, near the door. She hadn't come inside. She was still dressed in her work blouse, her arms crossed, but her eyes were locked on Ellie. Then she saw me. For a moment, I expected her to look away, to harden like she always did. But she didn't. Instead, she stepped forward one pace, not quite entering, but not leaving either. Her eyes flicked to the drawing in my lap, and I saw it, a twitch in her jaw, a blink too slow. Her hand resting against the doorframe like she needed the support. Then, quietly, she pulled something from her purse, a folded napkin. She wiped her cheek, didn't speak, didn't wave. She just watched until the applause ended, and when Ellie ran back into the group of kids, Rachel stepped back outside. She waited. She didn't interrupt, didn't reclaim space. But when I exited the school with Ellie, she nodded once, software small, the kind of nod that says, "I know." Not an apology, but something very close. That night, when the house was quiet, I brought the cedar box down from the top shelf of my closet. It still smelled faintly of lavender and old summer days. I opened it slowly, like touching memory with my hands. Inside were things I hadn't looked at in years. James's first birthday card to me, a dried rose from my wedding bouquet, Ellie's footprint in blue paint. I added the drawing she gave me, and beneath it, I placed the sealed envelope labelled, "To whomever she becomes." I didn't know if Ellie would open that letter at 18 or 38 or never. But I wanted her to know that her grandmother saw her, all of her, not just the giggles and sunshine songs, but the courage in her quietness, the way she paid attention, the way she loved with her whole heart, even when the adults forgot how. I ran my fingers along the inside edge of the box, then closed the lid gently. Not to hide anything, but to keep it safe. Downstairs, a breeze moved the curtain. The world was still turning. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at James, not even at Rachel, not really. Some things can't be undone, but they can be remembered, rewoven into something honest, and that's its own kind of justice. If you've ever poured your whole life into others and wondered who you are when they no longer need you, this story is for you. You're not invisible. You're not replaceable. You're still here. And that matters more than you know.